This is your mic. Welcome. I'm Adam Dalva. I'm the president of the National Book Critics Circle, and it's my honor to be here discussing these three incredible novels. I have a mandatory statement that I have to read, then I have bios that'll be a pleasure to read, and then we'll launch in. Quote, before we begin, I would like to let you know that books by authors in this program can be purchased from the Center for Fiction at the back of the church, where the authors will also be signing their books following the program. Authors, at the conclusion of the program, go that way. Okay. At the conclusion of this program, we ask everyone leave their seats so the next audience can be seated. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left, Susan Choi is the author of Trust Exercise, which received the National Book Award for Fiction, as well as the novels The Foreign Student, American Woman, A Person of Interest in My Education. She is a recipient of the Asian American Literary Award for Fiction, the Penn W.G. Sebald Award, a Lambda Literary Award, the Sunday Times Audible Short Story Award, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. She teaches in the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University and lives in Brooklyn. Woo! Her newest novel, Flashlight, total banger, published in June 2025. That was added by me. To her immediate left, Alejandro Heredia's debut novel, Loca, is on the Center for Fiction's 2025 First Novel Prize longlist. He is a writer from the Bronx, New York. He has received fellowships from Lambda Literary, Dominican Studies Institute, UNLV's Black Mountain Institute, and elsewhere. He received an MFA in fiction from Hunter College. Do you want me to plug your website? Visit him at www.aleheredia.com. And to his immediate left, and my far left, is Morgan Jerkins, the author of Call Baby, Wandering in Strange Lands, and the New York Times bestseller, another banger. This will be my undoing. Her latest novel is Zeal. Jerkins has taught at Columbia and Princeton universities and has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, and The Guardian, among many others. She also lives in New York. So welcome, thank you. What a treat. And then a quick run of show idea. I'll be kind of leading conversation for the first bit, and then we'll turn to you to ask questions. We're maxed out on microphones, so when it's your turn to ask a question, we'll maybe get a line down the aisle, which will make me think of my Catholic father. Okay, so just to set this up, these are three incredible novels that I had such a great time exploring and re-exploring in preparation for this panel. Each, in some way, is about the weight of history, which is also the title of this event, and the way that history explodes into the present action in strange and surprising ways. Just to quickly give you a little context, Loca is set in the late 90s and is about children from the Dominican Republic who are kind of leaving a trauma and then finding that they find a community of their own in New York, and they bond together. Zeal is a sweeping 150-year or so saga that tracks post-bellum kind of shared family dynamics across 4 states and finds itself in 2019 in New York City. And Flashlight, set in also multiple countries, Japan, a tiny bit in North Korea, a tiny bit in South Korea, and the US, tracks a disappeared man's family and their kind of efforts to rebuild life after a shocking incident that no one quite remembers properly. So all super ambitious, all terrific books. I thought I might start with just a bit of a generalist question. All 3 books felt to me like they had some aspect of excavation in them. When we write fiction so well as the 3 of you do, I do think it comes from a desire to tell a story. And these stories all felt to me like they were trying to excavate something that might not be in the normal historical narrative. Things that you might have discovered, things that might have drawn you in. And I wonder if you each might share what drew you to excavate these particular stories. Any order.
I'm just trying to turn on my microphone, but also loud. Can y'all hear me?
No, use the mic.
I have trouble turning it on.
Why don't you share these?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you turn, it's already on?
Oh, it's on.
Okay. So it was the pandemic. Like, it was March 2020. I was losing my mind trying to do virtual workout classes while watching Tiger King. And I was like, you know, New York got so quiet, like post-apocalyptic quiet. I had an apartment near Central Park, and I couldn't even hear a dog bark for days and weeks on, and I couldn't even hear my the people in my hallway. The only thing I heard were these blaring sirens, ambulance sirens, going up and down the boulevards. And I think in the midst of living by myself and going stir crazy, And also working as a senior editor at a time where I had to watch news. I couldn't even disconnect. I think it was just like, I want to write a love story. It was just it was that simple. I was like, I want to write a love story where we win at the end. I already know what the ending is going to be. And I think that's what I was really trying to excavate. I was just trying to write something that was going to make me feel good, because in the place of disconnect, I wanted to connect through prose. So that's why I wanted to excavate that.
Yeah, I mean, God, I could say so many things. I think to start, I didn't know that I was writing a historical fiction novel, because my novel takes place in the 1990s, until the novel came out, and then people were like, oh yeah, I found it in the historical fiction section at the library. So that was surprising, but I had this, and I think still do have this chip on my shoulder about the ways in which New York City is represented in our media, in books, and literature, and TV, et cetera. I grew up watching TV shows like Sex and the City, How I Met Your Mother, et cetera. And if you watch so much of these shows or read so many of these texts that are grounded in New York City, you might think that there are no immigrants, that there are no working class people, that there are no people of color, that there are no Dominicans. And so I just wanted very selfishly to challenge some of the sort of the master narratives that we tell about New York City. That was really important for me.
Oh my God, I'm so interested in what you all are saying that I kind of can't remember Adam's question, but I just have to speak to what you just said, Alejandro, because I have a teenager who, there's a huge like Sex and the City revival going on right now. And so he and his friends would be watching Sex and the City in my living room, like binging it. And I would come in and watch with them for a minute. And then at some point I had to turn to them and I said, you know, it wasn't like this. Like, because I was living here during these years, but they don't care is the thing. They want that fantasy. They want that sugary fantasy world. Excavation, such an interesting word, and also I love what you said about the pandemic, because I also was working on this book. It began in thinking before the pandemic, but it really started taking shape during the pandemic, like sitting on my back deck, listening to you. And there were more sounds, lots of dogs. I heard lots of dogs barking and neighbors banging the pots at 7 p.m., which was really comforting. But I think mostly what I'm thinking of is the fact that there are a lot of things that happen in my book, but one of them is inspired by a real life series of events that took place in Japan in the late 1970s, which to me doesn't feel like historical fiction because I was alive at that time, unlike some people up here. I bet. But these events had been not recognized as being part of an overall pattern, and it took decades for the people, you can see I'm dancing around spoilers. It took decades for the people who were affected by these events to recognize that these events were related and to start understanding that they had all been victimized by the same thing. And so I think that excavation was what really got me fascinated to start, was this thing of like these events lying in plain sight, but no one could recognize what they were or how they were connected. And slowly, as that pattern was formed, that was kind of the excavation that got me interested.
I love that. And before I ask my next question, is my mic on? I can't hear. Is my mic still on? Oh, good. I also have to plug Alejandro has a beautiful essay about Sex and the City that was in the offing a couple years ago. So right after this event, please do. We should all check that out. Now, from that bliss to this bliss, you mentioned, I think, recognition. And I think all three of you were actually mentioning recognition, that you were saying you wanted to find a love story that you hadn't seen, you wanted to find a New York that you hadn't seen, you wanted to, spoiler-free, engage with this historical question. All three of your books have an interesting component. Many times writers of fiction are asked about their research, and I do want to find out about the research, but also the characters in your books are in some way interested in either a form of research, like literally, a form of research in between, or in your case, running from the past and then having those like objects of the past resurfacing in a sort of archive of a novel. So I wonder if you might talk about both the practical questions of research. I'm sure there's people in this room writing historical fiction. I see some of my students who I know are. But also to think, what is it like to have a character investigating a past?
good question.
I'm here all day.
Can you hear me all? Or no, is the mic still not working?
Oh, it's here.
Okay. So I knew that I wanted to write a love story, and I wanted to write this epic, because I feel like when Black Americans aren't centered, a lot of it is not, we're not in the epic. And I've read epics from like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, like Gilgamesh, all that. I'm not saying to be pompous, like I want it to be that big, but I want it to be big in scale. I want it to be set against the backdrop of American history. And I love research. I'm a history nerd. And I reached out to a person at the Schomburg who worked in the manuscripts and archives division, and I told her as I was interviewing her, I said, I want to write a love story, but I want it to be very historical. And before she even got the job to help me, she found this love letter that was addressed February 4th, 1863, by a man named William Tate. And he was writing to his wife that was on another plantation. And if you see the letter, you think it was written like 5 years ago. It's so pristine. And he says to her, like, my master wants me to forget about you, but I haven't. And I was like, that's it. Like that's it. So my research with Zeal, it was like taking a sponge and squeezing it of all its juice. Like, I had to not only research what Natchez, Mississippi looked like right after the Civil War. I had to research all Black towns and research like the street names. So the street names, even the street names I listed in Shreveport, they're real. Like they're all real. I had to try to capture the dialect of these people by talking to African American linguists of that particular time, dictating like WPA narratives. Like it was very, very obsessive. And for a character, because if you go to the end of the book, Ardelia in 2019 Harlem, she's doing this history. I think it mimicked what I was doing, because it was like you realize how much is erased or omitted or changed when it comes to descendants of the enslaved, and it can be very frustrating and it can be very circuitous, but at the same time very magical, because someone will say something to you, or you'll go to a particular place and you'll be like, oh, it makes sense now. It all comes back around and it's all connected. So I tried to make Zeal in a way that like, it's not fantastic, like these people were actually real, but the way in which they found each other again is fantastic. So the man that I just told you about, William Tate, a friend of mine actually asked me, they were like, what actually happened to him at the end of his life? And I was afraid to look it up because so many narratives are sad. But I found out that not only did he reunite with his wife, they're buried in the same cemetery in Atlanta. And so it's like, it's just stuff like that. Like, it's like, you know what? It's not always sad. It is actually happy. And I'm not trying to conjure happiness. Like, it's in our lives. It's in our DNA.
I could tell you loved archives. At one moment in the book, she's fighting with her fiancé, and they're estranged, and he knows the only way to get her to answer a text is to text her about the archive she's researching. Not like, I love you, not anything like that. Yeah. Just the name of a place, and she's like, okay, I'll answer that. Like, yes. I want to talk about my research.
Yeah. It's like, you're not going to talk to me any type of way, but it's like, if I get your interest, then now you got to talk to me,
Either of you want to pick that up?
I'm curious, just very quickly,
Yes, take over.
Did you travel to any of the places while you were writing? Or?
No, so like, because it was 2020, I had to look at sketches. I had to look at, just like hear people talking about what these places might have looked like. And it was tough because even the first chapter, not the prologue, like the first 5 pages, that took years to perfect, because my editor at the time was like, how did they get from this place to that? I'm like, I literally just told you. He took the horse and he went down that way. He's like, no, what did he see along the path? I'm like, oh, like it's so difficult. I didn't go to any of those places. Like, I had to just go by pictures and go by map coordinates.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of riveted, actually. I want to hear more about, I don't know, I want to ask Morgan another question, but
That's great.
But, well, maybe I'll just make an observation that I thought of as you were speaking, because I think that sometimes it's really difficult to not be able to go to the place, and then sometimes it's kind of generative to not be able to go. And one of the things that contributed to my book, and there were a lot of different, streams feeding in, was a childhood trip that I took to Japan with my parents in the late 1970s, which was sort of the beginning of this kind of lifelong fixation of mine on Japan in the 70s and on events of Japan in the 70s, but I sort of not only didn't go while I was writing the book, I didn't want to. I felt like if I went to Japan, which is not Japan in the 70s anymore, that like this phantom that was kind of like, even the very gauziness of it in my memory was part of what was motivating the writing, and I felt like I couldn't have that disrupted by actually going to the real place and having it disrupted. And so, you know, like, I'm not answering your question at all.
No, you're great.
Sorry, but after I drafted the book and it was like all but done, I did actually have an opportunity to go to Japan, not for the book that I couldn't say no to. So I went, and I ended up visiting the town. I couldn't say no to this opportunity to visit the town where I'd gone. I had used the place where I lived with my parents for like 7-8 months as the model for a place where this child lives. And it's like, this building is, and in my memory it was, dark, damp, smelly, unpleasant, like deserted. The sun has never touched the interior. Like, it's like an above ground basement, the whole thing. And amazingly, this building's still standing, and my hosts found it, and they were like, do you want to go where you lived? And I was like, whoa. Okay, we get to the address, sun-splashed, beautiful. Every single landing had a huge window with the sun streaming in, where I remembered like this stairwell that was so dark. I was like, was this building renovated? No. It wasn't. So that was, anyway, that's, I guess, my point about like, it's so weird when you're working partly from the distortions of your own memory. Mm-hmm. It creates this other thing. And I'm kind of glad I made that weird Gothic building before I saw the real building, which was pretty uninterestingly pleasant as a building. Alejandro.
No, I love what you're bringing up about sort of traveling being disruptive, because I had a draft of Loca sort of already done, or I was at a place where, you know, when you're working on something, you sort of lose count of whatever draft number you're on. You're just like, I'm on year 4 or whatever. Somewhere in the middle, I ended up going to Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, and there's a park there called Parque Duarte where queer people gather very freely and openly. And the Dominican Republic, like much of the Caribbean, is a place sort of steeped in homophobia and transphobia, et cetera. And so it was really revelatory to arrive at this space and sort of see how people were making space for themselves in the park. And then I thought, okay, I have to include the park in the book. And so the park did end up making it into the book, but it was disruptive, I guess, in a formative way. Yeah.
And the park, when it appears in your book, is a site where people find a sort of internal community that is defiant of an external community.
Right.
And when we think about, I think, novels of history, we think of families and also like the disintegration of families over many, many years, which both of your books are very directly engaged in. But I was thinking that your book is also about the disintegration of a found family, like located in a trauma. And I wonder if we might think about the way history is very aligned with the personal in fiction, and the way that because when I read all 3 of your books, I essentially kept hoping for a reunion. That was a theme that kept coming up for me. I really hope these people come together. I also know, because in all cases there's a sort of hint that the past is not very good, and we're maybe 150 years later or maybe 30 years later. I'm wondering how you create those close bonds in your fiction and then invest the readers in wanting to see those bonds repair after they sunder.
Oh my God, that was just such a good question. I was like, man.
It's going so well.
No. I think because I'm going to be honest, like, as a descendant of the enslaved, every time I hear about slavery, it's sad and it's brutal and it's unrelenting. And that's not to say that it wasn't like that, but there had to be moments of ingenuity. There had to be moments of bonding. There had to be moments of love. Because if it wasn't, then how would I even have gotten here? So I think what wasn't disruptive was about place. It was more about slavery. Like, how do I not offend other descendants, and especially people from the Deep South, while also having this like love story in bloom? So I think the interesting part for me, honestly, was writing very intimate scenes. and showing the ways in which people were bonding and they were enslaved, but they were bonding. So like one scene I have is where Tirza finds out that she's free and she goes to the nearest church house because the pastor is speaking. And she's squirming in the pew because one time the pastor had a secret church meeting in the woods during harvest season with everyone talking about slavery and talking about freedom. And one by one, the enslaved people were leaving, and they left by themselves, and they do it in the woods. That was one of the funnest scenes I've ever written because it was so intimate. Like, oh my God, the pastor slept with an enslaved person. Yeah, because he loved the hell out of her. Excuse me, in the church. Sorry, he really loved her.
He's hot too. He's a hot pastor also.
What keeps people engaged, I think, was helpful for me is like, I always tell myself in fiction, you don't have to agree with every one of the writer's choices, but if you understand what drove them, what motivated them to do it, then I've done my job as a writer. And I just wanted to make sure I created these circumstances where, like, at the end of the day, you knew these people loved, and they were loved, and they made decisions where you didn't agree with them, but a lot of them were life or death. A lot of them were like snap decisions. And so that's what kept fun in the midst of all the historical research, was getting back to them talking to each other, fighting, and all those sorts of things.
You know, for me, I tend to think that one of the things that helps me along the path of trying to be the writer that I would like to be is being very suspicious of myself. There were certain prejudices that I had about queer experience in the Dominican Republic that I wanted to explore and question. I grew up as a queer person in New York City, and you're sort of taught that New York City is a queer safe haven, that it is sort of this mecca of queer life. And so I then developed the idea that everywhere else, especially the place where I was born, there is no queer life. There is no queer experience. There is no sort of space for self-expression, et cetera. And so the novel, in so many ways, was sort of me challenging myself to think through the ways in which people are creating space for themselves on the island, to refute or resist this idea that the past is worse than the present, and that our mother countries or home countries or wherever we come from are worse off than wherever we end up. That duality was really, really important, both in terms of time, but also in terms of place.
I love what you said about being suspicious of yourself. I have that too, and it brings me right back to what you asked about reunion, because I'm suspicious of myself because I feel that I'm a very sentimental writer, and so almost always when I never know where a book's going. When I start, I usually know the premise and I know maybe the characters, but I have no idea how the story will unfold. And there's always some point at which, like, I get very invested in what I fear is a very sentimental outcome, where I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that soppy thing where you bring everyone together. And sometimes I almost think I overcorrect. Like, I felt, so there are certain key reunions in my book that I just debated, like, will they happen or will they not happen? And I was like, oh, if you make them happen, you're just surrendering to your inner sentimental person. But it's funny because I feel like I did surrender, and I've had readers, I have wonderful feedback, but I've had readers sort of say there's a particular relationship in this book that's very difficult between a mother and a daughter, and they are having a hard time with each other. And then I felt like, I was like, oh, I really bring them together. Wow. And then I've had readers say, like, God, the mother and the daughter, like, why are they so far apart? And I was like, you thought so? I was like, did you not see where they started? Like, I was like, toward the end, remember when they have that one phone call and they don't hang up on each other? So it may be that I'm, like, measuring things differently, but I thought about reunion for obvious reasons almost from the beginning of this book, like, who would be reunited?
I also, when I read that phone call, I was like, those crazy kids are kind of working it out.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, well, really,
You got it.
I did. So I do want to maybe have a kind of attached follow-up to this. Sentimental is such an interesting word, right? Because it means kind of like, does it mean we want our readers to feel good, or does it mean that we construct massive coincidences to harm our readers? I'm not quite sure. I was thinking about the role of, like, bodies with emotion in all three of your books. Like in your case, I'm not going to spoil much, but there's like a finger at one point that's very indexically telling.
I was like, what?
In your novel, not spoiling much, there's an ear that's very indexically telling, and in your novel there is a woman with an illness, and her daughter is sort of so traumatized by it that later in the book, when she's confronted with the wheelchair, she realizes she can't even touch it. And you also write about MS so beautifully and like the way a body fails. So I wonder if you might talk about, I was thinking about what differentiates a book like this from maybe a beautiful work of nonfiction. And one is, I think, that focus on body experience, the way body has a memory in fiction. And I wonder if you might talk a bit about that.
Sorry, that was another good question. Again, it just makes me want to dwell on it. Look,
You can dwell. I can vamp.
Like, I think that when I was researching Zeal and I was trying to figure out how a way to give respect to people that weren't even considered human, that were not allowed to read and write, that weren't even allowed to look a white person in the eye, that weren't even allowed to congregate with 3 or more people. I remember I spoke to a scholar in Shreveport, white guy, and I said, how do I work within the parameters of this time period? And he said like the most horrific line that I'll keep forever. And he said, anything that you could have imagined during slavery most likely happened. Mm-hmm. And obviously my mind mostly went to the grotesque. It leaned there automatically, but I also thought, how do I write about an enslaved black woman that isn't always terrible? Like, I don't want to reinforce that. I don't want to write scenes of rape in graphic detail. You can get that from another author. Like, what type of ethical choices can I make? And I think when it comes to, like, bodies and memory, it's just like, in this political climate, and I won't get into that too much, but somebody once asked me, like, how do we talk about history when it's declining? And I'm like, your body is an historical document. Yeah. And I think that there are traits about us that are passed down from generation to generation. I think particularly with people who are descendants of the enslaved, there's technology that we have that even though it's been, legislation and governments have tried to crush it out, it's always there. There's always a seed there. And I think that's why I wrote Zeal, because even though I'm covering 150 years of history, there's still remnants of their ancestors that are still there in spite of all the movement that has happened. And so it was really important to me that, yes, we talk about the police surveillance, yes, we talk about sharecropping and all that, but I wanted people to see how tender their bodies were, how tender they were with each other. And that was really important for me with both the men and the women. Like, I remember I had a person say, like, Tirza is one of my favorite characters in the book. She's one of the formerly enslaved people, and she sees her son in jail, and he's traumatized because his dad was lynched. They had to flee because of that, and he's upset because his destiny was ruined. And one thing that I love that I wrote in there that somebody pointed out to me, because sometimes you write and you forget, so you read the words back to you, is she said, before you came to this town, before you came from this place, you came from me. And that was beautiful for me to write that, because it was just like, you could always come home to somebody. You were from somebody else. And that helps to reinforce that. And plus, I love being sentimental. I'm sorry. Like, I could be academic for you. I could be clinical. I can tell you all about the epistemology of blah, blah, but it's like, I wanted people to feel good. Like, you come from somewhere. Like, you're bigger than this particular spot, That meant something to me.
Totally.
Well, I think that, I'll speak for myself, I also hesitate with this inclination toward being sentimental, and I judge myself a lot for that, but I think it is because we are taught to prize or value particular kinds of ways of being intelligent, right? If you are sort of a person of the mind, a person of thought, then you are a smart person, or you're doing something well on the page. But it is not, for some reason, we do not call a writer intelligent when they make you feel something necessarily. Only when they make you think something really critically, or when there's, whatever, a bunch of stuff in the text. And so I also have that sort of complicated relationship to being sentimental on the page, but I try to tell myself that deep feeling is another form of genius, right? And that it's okay to explore that. And then I'll also say I loved what you were saying about the history's effect, the history sort of pressing up on the body. I was raised by people who would not speak about the things that they survived. And I grew up seeing, sort of having questions or not necessarily understanding their sort of personal history, but then seeing all of the ways in which it was getting in the way of them living their lives in the present. And I just wanted to capture that in the novel, to say, if for many of us, if you do not deal with where you come from or who you come from, you cannot make a life right now, or it becomes incredibly difficult to make a life right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this word sentimental as the two of you were talking, and I think one of the reasons that I always kind of circle it with some, because we're just all throwing this word around, like, what do we mean? And I think we might mean different things, and one of the things that I definitely mean when I'm cautioning myself against it is I'm always very worried that I don't want my writing to manipulate the reader with emotion that I feel like the story didn't earn it, but I'm trying to earn the reader's, I'm trying to like sink in the claws and hold on to the reader, even though the work doesn't really merit this. And I'm very, like, all I really, concern myself with in terms of the writing is like, can this emotional experience that I would like to that I would like to produce in the reader, can it be real? Do you know what I mean? Like, can it be authentic, and can it really like come out of the story, and it's not me kind of like yanking the reader around? I think that's what I mean by sentimentality, is that sort of tear-jerking, like, I know what's going to get you. And because, again, reunion was one of the things that I really wanted to achieve in my book, but reunion for me is an automatic, I'm crying already, even thinking about it. I was like, the book has to earn this. Do you know what I mean? I can't just like, like stand logic on its head in order to achieve this reunion that's going to make the tears flow. And I think that's what I like. I think it's false sentiment is what I am always on my guard against. And that's why listening to you also talk about the body was so interesting, because, just one more thing I'll say is that, like, in my book, there's a person to whom events take place that live in the body alone. They're gone from the mind. And I worried a lot about that. I was like, is that a conceit? Like, am I making that up to like yank the reader around? I really wanted that to feel authentic. And so I guess it's that concern between depicting something authentic and depicting something because you feel like it's going to get you an effect. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to get an effect just for the sake of like getting it.
Totally. And I think sometimes there's also a difference between what you feel as an author and what your character feels. I think sometimes, as I'll speak for myself as an author, I'm like, oh, I love what's going on here, and I want them to be reunited, or I want them the love affair to work, or whatever it is. But that might not be the logic of the emotional world of these characters. That might just be me and all my feels.
And writers always see their own logic like highlighted, and a reader is more, I mean, speaking of someone who read all three of these books quite recently, like, I had the feeling over and over of really wanting to finish. And I think that is sort of where that emotional energy you're talking about might come in a little bit, this like real desire to guess at a plot. Anyway, I think I have time for maybe one more, and then it'll be your time. So think about what questions you want to ask. You'll probably get complimented for your questions. I keep getting complimented. Fingers crossed for you. Now, I do want to ask a question about language, if I can, because I found all three books, both I think because they're interested in family histories and because they're interested in histories of place. I was laughing when you said the 90s are historical fiction. Most of my students are born in 2007 this year, so that's the long ago. I know, I'm sorry. A little trauma for the panel up here. I was thinking about your title, for example, which has a very interesting linguistic thing that comes up in the book. Your book exists in many languages, and I think also speaks to the idea of a childhood language that is partially forgotten, but is sort of the language in a mind. And in your book, language is something that evolves over a 140-year period to the point that there's a very kind of epiphanic moment toward the end of the book where a name said phonetically has completely changed the history of a family. And you also write in many different dialects in the book itself. So I wonder, just thinking about how language plays a part in a book like this, because with all three, I was really captivated by that.
Oh yeah. I had to learn African American vernacular English all over again. Like I've been speaking it since I was born, but I've never seen it written. And I met a man named Hiram Smith. He is a professor at Bucknell, and he was like, we were on Zoom. He was like teaching me how to speak, to be honest. He was like, I want you to listen to this narrative from a formerly enslaved woman from South Carolina, and I want you to dictate what she's saying. And she's talking about her life, but then she says master, but the T is very slight. And he's like, why is it that Hollywood keeps putting massa when there were enslaved people that said master is very light? And he was like, I want you to go back to these narratives and I want you to dictate it yourself. And then I remember I was like, how am I gonna sound like a Mississippian from 1865? I wasn't there, my people are from New Jersey. And then a friend of mine who's also a linguist, Taylor Jones, he was like, listen to old blues music. He said, if you listen to Muddy Waters, he was like, his grandparents were born on a plantation. He's like, dictate his songs. So I was dictating like Muddy Waters and Bob Johnson and like Son House and all these people from that area to get the dialect correctly. And then I had to remind myself that A-A-B-E is highly complex. So if some character is speaking with the I-N and no G at the end, they have to speak like that the entire time. You can't change the rules of the system in which they're working in. I think the hardest part for language is I didn't want their dialect to make it seem like they were intellectually inferior. And this has been a dilemma since the time of Zora Neale Hurston. If I write about Southern Black people, and then they're not writing the Queen's English, I want them to have an experience of emotional interiority. And I had to just honestly trust the readers, like, this is how they spoke. This is how these people were speaking here. And I was hoping, and I think you caught on, like, as the generations go by, you see how the inflections are changing depending on where they speak. Absolutely. But that was tough. The copy editors did help me. They were like, wait a minute, this person said this. And I was like okay.
Yeah, I mean, so much of writing is about translation for me, not just in the obvious ways because these characters are born in the Dominican Republic and then they move to New York, so they're sort of between two languages. But I was also trying, for me, it was really important not to impose my own language onto the language of these predominantly working class people. I think as writers, I can be very seductive. I have a lot of very fancy thoughts throughout the day, and those are all very nice, and I would like to explore some of those in my fiction. But this working class mother who works at a supermarket is not thinking in the way that I'm thinking of things with the same language that I'm thinking about relationships and love and belonging. And so part of the translation is that for me. And then I think also I was very interested in vernacular because I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx around people from all over the world, and everybody's English was different. We were all speaking the same language, but also not speaking the same language at the same time. And I wanted to capture some of that energy in the book.
Yeah. Oh, I want to talk to you about Zora Neale Hurston now, because I'm going to be teaching her again, and that whole question of how to frame it to your students is, anyway, but I'll try to stay on topic here.
No. Follow Zora.
I mean, I think, language is so interesting to me, and mainly, I think, because I feel like a prisoner of my inability to have ever actually achieved fluency in any language other than English, and so I'm always really fascinated by language, and in this book, kind of writing as an outsider about a world of multiple language identities that the characters are living inside of, because this is not an experience I've ever had, and I'm always straining to understand, like, what is that like? My father is a great inspiration for a lot of my work, but actually is not the inspiration for the character in this book. But at the same time, my father's historical circumstances and this character's were similar in that they were both subjects of colonization. They were both subjects of imperialism who, in their childhood, were born into a language that was not permitted in terms of the their public life. They had to go to school in a different language. They had to actually have a different name. Their whole identity as like a subject of the state was in the colonizer's language. And so my father was born Korean, but he went to school in Japanese. And also his father was an English literature professor, so he learned English on top of it all. And I only was ever with my father in English. You know, like our whole relationship was in English, but I could always see that he was such a different person in his different languages, and I always wished I could be in there, but I could never be in there, you know? So I think with this milieu, these characters also are like living in a similar historical time frame and having a similar kind of cluster of language identities.
To like wonderful effect because they're constantly left out of things, I think, as a result, and there's never like a total exchange of knowledge. Okay, we have about 8 minutes, maybe time for like two great questions. Maybe this is a great panel. Now I will say I have been asked to repeat your questions into the mic. Oh my God, we have a mic. Everything's changed. Be as voluminous as you'd like. So come on up to this mic. It's very simple. You just walk down a massive church aisle, turn left.
Not intimidating at all.
Totally. It's really easy if you say it out loud. Don't be shy. Extra credit to my students. No. How much extra credit I won't say. Don't be shy. I have more. We'll give you 1 minute. We'll just let you think, cogitate.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd do it either. There's a little
There's
bit
a
of
question
town hall
over
vibe.
here.
Oh,
Now
yes.
you need to come to the mic. And there's okay, everyone. This is the first question, then you line up next, and we'll do it that way. So come on up to the mic. You go first. Ask your question. No, well, we'll have this one first, and then you at the mic. I've been asked everything into the mic. Come on over to the mic. Yes.
I walked down the aisle.
You did great.
So since all of you work with a sense of place and distortions of memory, do you ever feel like you miss a place or a sense of belonging to a place where you've never been to?
Ooh.
Yes.
I wish I'd asked that.
Love your
Darn it.
question.
Yes.
What the hell?
Yeah, like so when I saw Sinners and I saw that juke joint and I wrote a juke joint scene in Zeal, I was like, I want to go to a juke joint. Like, I want to have moonshine. I want to see a fight break out. Like, so, I definitely missed that. I missed even like the mobilization of black churches at the turn of the 20th century, how much they got active together. The freedmen schools, like thinking about how they were teaching black people how to read, the type of mutual aid efforts that were happening in a moment like of Reconstruction, even though it was very dangerous. I missed that. Yeah. Oh, I love that question.
Yeah, how depressing.
I think for me, less of a place, and this is a very writerly answer, but all the people that I could have been that I am not. Yeah, like I'm always asking myself, like, well, what if I would have lived a queer adolescence in the DR? I didn't. My characters do, but I did not. So.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think I miss places that people miss and share with me, and that I try to imagine, and then I feel this longing for them and try to write about them, even though I never saw them.
Love it. All right, the person very confident in their projection.
When you're trying to write dialogue very authentically, are you ever afraid that you might lose the reader or confuse the reader?
When you're trying to write dialogue authentically, are you ever worried that you might lose or confuse the reader?
Yes, but I am okay with, I think sometimes confusing the reader is okay because the characters have to be talking to each other. You know, the main thing that I tell my students, for example, in sort of creative writing 101 is that the characters cannot be talking to the audience. They're in conversation with each other. And so that means that the reader sometimes is on the outside. You might not know what the characters are talking about, and your work is to, one, sit in that mystery, and also maybe do some work to sort of figure out what it is that they're talking about.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think it's important not to over-rely on dialogue to explain things to the reader, which I think is what you're saying, essentially. And so, often I am using dialogue not to communicate information, but to give a sense of like the enigma of communication between two or more people. Like, 'cause often the dialogue isn't really about information going back and forth, it's about information not going back and forth and giving the reader a sense of how does that sound.
And yes, I was gonna say yes, because like part of being a Black American is there's certain things that just are not always said. You know, it's either like a look at someone, it's either like a vocalization, and if I kept explaining that, that's gonna be an like sort of like a barrier for me. Like example, like if you're thinking about like death, I'm sorry, but sometimes when it comes to Black Americans, it's funny. So even when I'm in conversation, I'll say, you know, there's gonna be some slow singing and flower bringing. And I told a friend of mine that, and he's a white guy. He just like burst into laughing, like, yeah, it's not obvious, but it's a roundabout. That's a part of culture. So so going back to the Zora Hurston thing, like that's responsibility of the Black writer. We could talk all day about that, and I'm always worried that I'm going to lose someone. But at the same time, in order to be submersed in the story, they're talking to each other, and I have to trust that the reader, if they're reading my book, they're not gonna be stopped if I have a sentence like "use a plum full," because if you stop at that, then I'm like, hey, what do you want me to do? You know.
Any of you have a follow? I have a follow-up, but if any of you do, it's your time. Okay, I'll close. You promise? Okay, I'll close. It occurs to me that what we're also talking about here is a sort of asymmetry that can occur. And I was very interested that all of you are multi-perspective in your books. And it's not just like two dominant perspectives. There's occasionally like a collective first-person plural or a surprise-like perspective character very close to the end of your book. And I wonder if you just might say, like, is there a moment when you're multi-perspective where you're like, I can actually just do one more perspective than I was planning? And is that like an ear thing? Because I was very surprised with some of the perspectives in these books.
Yeah, I don't like to fall on this, but like I'm a Gemini. I went to school for comparative literature. I'm always trying to find one more perspective to bring it home. But then like, I didn't want the reader to get confused. Like, okay, why are we getting into the head of this person? Why are you keep switching? So that's the help of a good editor, that to help you rein it in. But yeah, I'm always like, just one more portrait, just one more. And also the book has to end. My book is coming in like 400 pages. Like it's got to stop at a certain point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of perspective is always, you know, what is it of service to? Sort of what is it doing on the page? And if it's just for the sake of having more fun, then I try to hold myself back a little bit and try to tell myself there are other ways of having fun. But if the change in perspective opens up the world, that sort of feels like a useful way of sort of changing perspectives. But for me, I'm a rising Gemini. I do too much and I sort of have to pare back and edit stuff out. Yeah.
Wow. And you?
Aquarius.
Okay.
I mean, but
Air sign.
everyone knew that already. It was obvious. I mean, I agree with Morgan. I'm not seeking to confuse the reader, but I do like to surprise the reader. And I often also get an itchy feeling inside like the perspectives that I've created, where sometimes it's just very self-serving, where I'm like, I just want to jump out of this viewpoint and see this person from someone else's viewpoint. It's often like twitchy boredom. And there's yet another, there's a perspective chapter that didn't make it into my book. Oh, wow. And yet another one that was where, as you say, the book has to end. We were all like, this one's gonna have to just go.
Yeah. I think one more thing to add is like the reason why I felt like I had to do multiple perspectives, because like we're talking about love here. Like there's always a different side. There are things that are not communicated that can change the trajectory of a relationship. And that's why I switched a bit, because I was like, I can't just have an omniscient voice. Yeah. It's always gonna be affected by people's already preconceived notions of who that person is.
And we're also trying to keep ourselves awake, or sort of interested in the text in some ways as we're writing, you know what I mean? And so like when you're writing, the change of perspective for me is just a way of like jolting myself into awake, sort of metaphorically and spiritually with the text.
Yeah, exactly. Getting unstagnated.
I'm getting the hard cut, so let me just, I know, I wish. So let me say a thing from me and then a thing that I have to read. A thing from me, I love this was great, these are brilliant authors, please come back and buy their books. And hold your applause until I read this horrible thing. Closing statement, thank you for coming. The authors will now sign their books at the back of the church. It's over there. The Center for Fiction will be selling their books there. Authors, please bring your name cards and go with your signing assistant to the signing table. Audience, please clear the area for the next program.